If you remember headbutting TIE fighters, wrestling TIE fighters, and crushing TIE fighters like cans, then you played Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2. But which one? Because there were 3 completely different versions released across 5 different platforms, and in this video we're going to compare each of them. Released in 2008, the original Force Unleashed was an over-the-top, stormtrooper throwing, vehicle destroying, Star Destroyer pulling power trip. The game was a big financial success for LucasArts, shipping over 7 million copies and becoming the fastest selling Star Wars game of all times. So naturally, the company quickly began working on a sequel, and 2 years later they released The Force Unleashed 2. First, let's cover the flagship version released for the PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and PC. The game begins with Darth Vader arriving on the Imperial-occupied Camino. Turns out he's been trying to clone Starkiller for a while now, and this one is the latest in a long line of failed clones. This particular clone is haunted by Galen's old memories. Alright, time for some quick combat training. Give him a second, he's still a bit rusty. Starkiller has a bit of a breakdown and escapes the training chamber. Well, I say escape, he just jumps out of the window and then falls for a few miles, headbutting TIE fighters in his way. All of Starkiller's over-the-top moves are back from the first game. Lightsabers coated in lightning, the Kamehameha, and of course the ability to destroy both vehicles and environments around you. This time around, however, we've got a few new abilities like the Jedi Mind Trick that gives stormtroopers a migraine so bad they jump out the window. The first level is great at reminding you how absolutely bombastic these games are. For example, electrocuting these jet troopers and then watching them fly around like illegal fireworks. The Force Unleashed 2 also introduces Force Flurry, which is a kind of rage mode that absolutely disintegrates your enemies. The lightsabers also act a little less like baseball bats this time around, giving you the ability to cut off some of the enemy's limbs. Alright, so Starkiller steals Vader's TIE fighter and flies to Cato Nimordia, where General Kota has been imprisoned and made to fight in the gladiator pits. This game loves to make you fight the same walkers over and over again. The whole Cato Nimordia section of levels is a bit of a mixed bag. On one hand, it's really nice to see this planet that we only got a glimpse of in Revenge of the Sith, but these levels are a bit too long and they're grindy, an issue that would plague the rest of this game going forward. Eventually, you do reach the boss. Now, the first game set the bar pretty high when it came to larger-than-life, over-the-top set pieces, and you can clearly tell the developers were trying to match that with this section. Rancor? No, you've got to find this giant beast thing. The developers seemed so proud of this thing that they stretched out the boss fight across a series of different sections. First, you engage in some BDSM play, then you get the King Kong section, and finally we get this endless freefall battle. This is the video game equivalent of that endless runway from the Fast and Furious. The battle ends in a very Dragon Ball kind of way. Starkiller and Kota then catch the flying Rogue Shadow, and get off the planet. General Kota then tries to recruit Starkiller, but Galen is feeling very emo at that moment, so he goes off to Dagobah to enjoy his copy of the Black Parade in peace. Eventually he runs into Yoda, before venturing into the Dark Side Cave, where he sees some foreboding visions of his clones and Juno. These visions set Galen on the straight and narrow, and he decides to return to the Alliance. Just like that. Hold on, Yoda, why are you just letting him go? Why don't you train him instead of the farm boy? This fella pulled a Star Destroyer out of the sky. The entire Dagobah section is really strange. The only real gameplay is just Galen walking towards Yoda's hut. It almost feels like this was some kind of a weird mandate from up above. The developers were told they needed a cameo from Yoda on Dagobah, and so they just reluctantly shoehorned it in. Alright, so Starkiller rendezvous with the Rebel fleet and goes looking for Juno. Unfortunately, Vader has hired Boba Fett to kidnap Juno. Oh boy, I can't wait for the cool Boba Fett boss battle. You know, like in the first game's DLC, right? After all, why would you have a character like Boba Fett in the game? Surely they must be building up to something, right? So the next level has Starkiller make his way through the dark ship, taking on these annoying invisible soldiers before facing the big Mantis Boss. And in an unexpected twist, the fight finishes with you riding him like some kind of a rodeo bull. You know what, it still controls better than Epona in Ocarina of Time. The Rebel fleet then jumps to hyperspace and arrives outside Kamino, where they engage the Empire in a space battle. This is followed by Starkiller going through more dark corridors, taking on more troopers, more lightsaber grunts, and doing a ton more quick-time events. Yes, the combat does get repetitive, but so did the original game. What kept things fresh were these big, elaborate levels, but the entire midsection of The Force Unleashed 2 is just made up of these generic starship corridors. Okay, it's been a while since we've had an over-the-top set piece. Why don't we have Starkiller pilot the giant cruiser down to the planet, throw some space debris out of the way before launching the ship straight at the city, but jumping out at the last second, then straight up flying alongside it for a while before using one of these TIE fighters as a spring cushion to land? You know what, I give up trying to make sense of this. Now that we're on the planet's surface, it's time for more grindy, repetitive levels. Eventually, the monotony of the same enemies is replaced with this awkward jumping section. Finally, Starkiller reaches the cloning chamber, and this is where things get really jarring. One second you're just walking along, and then bam, you're being choked out by Vader. Now, the first game's Vader battle has become notorious for its over-the-top action and the world-class ass-kicking that Vader gets. As for this confrontation, well, it's broken up into two main sections. You throw the VATs back at Vader, then take out the clones, then hit him a few times before repeating the same process again and again. Ironically enough, the only thing that breaks the monotony are the glitches. Oh, looks like Vader's acquired some interesting force powers. I mean, how am I even supposed to attack him now? Eventually, my controller just froze, so I couldn't even do anything. The second part of the battle takes place outside in the rain. Starkiller surrenders in exchange for Juno's life, but she tries to attack Vader and ends up being crushed. This pushes Starkiller over the edge and he transforms into his final form, Jamie Foxx from Amazing Spider-Man 2. We get a bunch more hacking and slashing, more property damage, until Starkiller finally brings Vader down to his knees with the power of Y. And just like in the first game, we are presented with a choice, kill Vader or spare him. Each results in a dark or light side ending. In the dark side ending, Juno dies, Starkiller decides to kill Vader but ends up getting cut down by another clone. Turns out this has all been a test for this other clone who is now tasked with wiping out the rest of the rebels. This would of course lead into the Return of the Jedi alternate reality DLC, which I covered in this video. In the light side ending, Vader is captured by the rebels and imprisoned in this big toaster. Oh, and it also turns out Juno's not dead after all. Way! And so that's it for the flagship version of The Force Unleashed 2. This game is very much a mixed bag. It actually starts off pretty strong, adding some new features and showing off some grand ambitions, but it almost seems like the developers just gave up right after the Cato no Mordia section. One of the most memorable things about the first game was its epic galaxy-spanning story, and on paper, The Force Unleashed 2 kind of had all the ingredients to be a worthy follow-up, and yet, despite all the cloning and the Dagobah sections and the big battle on Kamino, this game's plot still kind of feels like a bit of a side quest, probably because the story feels really short and rushed. Starkiller gets off Kamino, rescues Kota, spends a bit of time on Dagobah, and then returns back to Kamino. The gameplay is very similar to the first game, but feels a lot more repetitive. The appearances from iconic movie characters like Yoda and Boba Fett are nice, but they feel little more than fan service cameos. I mean, why couldn't we fight the bounty hunter instead of this big spider? Before we continue, just a quick note to say that I have started a Patreon. It's only £1 a month, so if you've enjoyed my content, please consider subscribing, as it would go a long way in helping me release videos consistently. Thank you for considering. Alright, moving on. The original game is best known for the flagship version, but there was also a version released for the PS2, PSP, and Wii. This version is completely different and has gone on to have quite a following, with many actually preferring it to the flagship. The Force Unleashed 2 took the same approach with the Wii version. It uses the same voice actors, but the cutscenes are completely different, and they're even rendered in a different style in order to fit in with the Wii's graphics. Now, this being the Wii, the controls are a complete waggle fest, making you do things like shake the nunchuck to use force lightning and hold the Wiimote sideways to block. It's amazing how Starkiller can block attacks without moving the rest of his body.
Most impressive.
You've pretty much got the same moves and force powers as in the flagship, but the awkward controls make using force lightning and force push a bit tedious, so you'll probably just end up spamming A throughout every level. All the Wii levels have the same themes and overall objectives, but they're built and structured completely differently. In the flagship, dismemberment was mainly limited to limbs. The Wii version takes this to Jedi Outcast levels, letting you slice poor stormtroopers in half. So much for the Wii being a kid's console. This version actually has Vader chasing Starkiller through the first level, and just like in the first game, all the quick time events have been replaced with some nice waggle. The monster fight is a bit shorter and ends with you waggle stabbing it in the eye. Plus, the falling sequence is just a cutscene in this one. Dagobah probably has the most differences. The opening section actually consists of some traversal instead of just walking in a straight line, and you actually get some gameplay in the cave. You do some mirror puzzles, then see the other clones get choked by tentacles, force branches, and then you have to press A to bang on the glass, otherwise Vader will just continue to choke Juno forever. Another difference is that you actually fight Boba Fett in this one. Well, not really, they're just quick time events. My favorite difference has to be Starkiller's rage mode in this version. He goes absolutely berserk and starts slicing up all the enemies around him in slow motion while someone whispers parcel tongue in his ear. The ending is also a little different. He meets Vader, who throws down a quick diss and then buggers off again. There's a lot less emphasis on jumping around a million different platforms in this one, and a lot more emphasis on slaughtering your own clones. And of course, more waggle. The big dramatic exchange in the rain is also a bit bizarre in this one. Juno doesn't even try to attack Vader, he just crushes her for no reason. Look. You do get the electricity battle, but it's a bit more toned down. The cutscenes are also nowhere near as insane. Instead, Starkiller just ends up throwing Vader into this big light bulb. Now, the first game's last gen version was also brimming with side content and multiplayer features. Unfortunately, this game doesn't really have that. The only real multiplayer it has is a Super Smash Bros. Clone. Yes, you heard me right. Of all the multiplayer modes they could have done, they decided to go for a Smash clone. It's alright, I guess it's worth playing just for the novelty alone. And so that's the Wii version. I've got to be honest, it's a bit disappointing, not because it's a downgrade in graphics. The last gen version of the original game was also a step down in graphics, but it seemed like those developers were trying to overcompensate for that in every other department, which would result in it becoming a fan favorite. The Wii version of The Force Unleashed 2 is a different game from the flagship, but somehow it still manages to retain a lot of the negative aspects from that game. Apparently a PSP version was also in development but ended up getting cancelled, which is a shame because the first game's PSP version was packed with extra features. And speaking of handhelds, let's move on to the Nintendo DS version. Now, the original DS game was a scaled down 3D action-adventure interpretation of the flagship. This one is a side-scrolling beat-em-up which uses the touchscreen for force powers and special moves. Like many games of the time, it uses PowerPoint slides to tell the story, but for some reason they're this weird hybrid of concept art and stills from the flagship, which ends up with some real nightmare fuel. Also, this version has the thinnest lightsabers I've ever seen. It's like they're fencing blades. As far as DS games go, this one's alright. It's a condensed version of the console game, but all the main levels and bosses are still there. And so there we have it, every version of The Force Unleashed 2. It's no secret that most consider this game to be a step down from the original in pretty much every way. The story feels haphazard and it lacks depth, while the gameplay is repetitive and grindy. Now, I think the main reason for this is due to the game's incredibly short development cycle of only 2 years. Apparently, the game's director Hayden Blackman was only given 3 weeks to write the script, and the sad thing is you can see flashes of what the game could have been if it was given more time, from Starkiller's search for identity and meaning to these grand gameplay set pieces. The pre-release trailer for this game consisted of this really cool looking cinematic, where Starkiller takes on Vader and a bunch of stormtroopers in this forest. But there was nothing even close to this level in the final game, so perhaps this was something else the developers had to cut. Unfortunately, the series would never get to right the ship and complete Starkiller's story. A sequel was in early stages of development, but ended up being cancelled by Disney after they purchased Lucasfilm. And so Starkiller's story was left on a cliffhanger, relegated to the moniker of Legends along with the rest of the old expanded universe. Now, Disney Star Wars has been known to bring back some select Legends characters, so maybe there's hope for Starkiller after all. Leave a comment and let me know if you'd like to see him brought back in this new continuity. Also, please let me know your thoughts on The Force Unleashed 2 in general. How do you feel about its gameplay and story, and where would you rank it amongst other Star Wars games? As always, thanks for watching. Please consider supporting me on Patreon, and a big thanks to all of my existing patrons. Also, if you've enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.